For 30 years, the Subaru Impreza has been an iconic nameplate on Australian roads. If you're from the PlayStation generation like me, there's a really good chance that you put P plates on one of these as your first car. But to Subaru, the Impreza is much more than that. This car and its WRX Performance variant really put the brand on the map, moving it from a small-time Japanese automaker to a global household name. Things change though, and despite 30 years of history as a beloved nameplate in Australia, the Impreza has gone from bestseller to tumbling down the sales charts as buyers shuffle into small SUVs instead of hatchbacks and sedans. The question is whether this new 2024 version is still worth a look.
Now in its 6th generation, the Impreza range has been trimmed down to just one hatchback body style and 3 variants. The base L, which we're looking at today, mid-spec R and top-spec S. In traditional Subaru nature, these 3 variants are priced relatively close together, and the base L comes with almost all the kit you really need, with the R and S grades adding mainly luxuries.
Costing from a touch over $30,000 before on-road costs, the new 6th generation Impreza is slightly more expensive than it was before. And while it does come really well equipped even in this base model form, it is still a little bit more expensive than many of its key rivals, and that's a problem in a segment where every dollar counts.
For example, you can get into a hybrid version of the Toyota Corolla Ascent Sport for similar money to this entry-level L version, while the outgoing Hyundai i30 can be had significantly cheaper in its most basic trim. What might make you think twice is the Subaru's standard all-wheel drive system, where its rivals are front-wheel drive. But in an environment where fuel costs are so high, I can understand how people would probably prefer to see a hybrid version instead. As mentioned though, standard equipment is strong. Forget steel wheels because the Impreza L gets 17-inch alloys while the higher 2 grades get 18s. LED headlights are the order of the day across the range, and when it comes to the interior, the hero feature really is that massive 11.6-inch multimedia touchscreen, which comes complete with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, which pair nicely with its standard wireless phone charger. That's not all though. The full set of key active safety equipment is also standard across the range, which probably leaves you wondering what the point of getting a higher grade Impreza is at all. The R gets premium cloth seats with additional charging ports in the cabin, 8-way power adjust for the driver with heated front seats, a leather steering wheel and shifter, steering responsive headlights and LED fog lights. The top-spec S, meanwhile, adds a 10-speaker premium audio system, built-in sat-nav, an electric sunroof, and, of course, synthetic leather seat trim. So what did the Impreza cost 30 years ago? Well, you might be surprised to find that this one cost a touch under 30 grand before on-roads in 1994. So not as much of a bargain compared to today's car as you might have thought. Sure, standard equipment isn't quite what we expect from a vehicle today, but at the time it had a bunch of things which were rare on entry-level cars, like 4 power windows, a cutoff for the headlights so they didn't drain the battery when you turn the car off, and the option of cruise control and a 4-speed automatic transmission.
3 decades has morphed the Impreza so much. The original version over there almost looks like a station wagon, but this one in today's market is much more contemporary. It has that traditional kind of bubble silhouette like every other hatchback on the market, and that is for better or worse. I don't think it stands out as much, but it also does sync up really nicely with the rest of Subaru's range.
There's also quite a bit to like on the inside of the new Impreza too. Let's take a look.
So I've got a bit of on and off weather today, and what better time to talk about the interior of the new Impreza. On the inside of the Impreza, aesthetically, it's synced up with the rest of the Subaru range, and that does mean that tough, adventure-ready style that was present before, but also the new elements which help to tidy up this interior a little bit because it was quite busy before. You've now got this massive multimedia touchscreen in here, replacing the 3 screens that were here previously, and you've also got quite a tidy little dashboard, but it's interesting because there's no digital dash option. It is just analog dials still. And there are other elements which I really like in here as well, like the nice simple dash layout and the big chunky bumper car steering wheel that's such a Subaru signature. You also get these lovely seats which you sink into, and one thing we should talk about before we move on is how this base car actually has some elements which are quite refreshing in it. I know it's not as fancy as what we might be used to from a lot of other hatchbacks and what's sort of become standard today, but I kind of like the urethane steering wheel and the cloth finishes in the doors and the cloth trim on the seats. It is a bit monotone, but it's not bad. Just like a bunch of other Subarus, there are some great practicality touches in this cabin. You've got some large bottle holders in the doors, good for things like our CarsGuide bottle there. And there's also a nice pocket down there as well. You've also got these nice soft touch materials for your elbows on both sides. It's not like a fake leather, it's almost like a vinyl material, but you know, keeps the cabin comfortable even though there are a bunch of hard plastic finishes in here. This console box is also enormous, and inside I've got another CarsGuide bottle which I can fit there. Now interestingly, one area that I'm not so keen on is this little tray here underneath the multimedia screen. You get your outlets there and an auxiliary audio input as well, which is kind of rare these days. But there's a wireless charger here, even on the base car, and my issue with it is the surface that they've chosen to make it out of is kind of like a hard plastic. So you can put your phone down there for the wireless charging effect, but then as soon as you turn a corner, it kind of slides out of the area, which is a bit silly. It'd be nice to see that made of like a more soft rubberized material. Other than that, visibility is not bad out of this cabin, and this area having been trimmed down a little bit is kind of nice. So you've got a touchscreen that's not too far away from where your hands are, and most of the menus are pretty straightforward, although I will say there's no dials for like fan speed, for example. You have to use that through the touchscreen. And there's also touch-based climate functions in there, which is never the best, although you do get these temperature radio buttons here, and you do get dials for the tuning and volume too. So it's sort of a little bit give and take in terms of the usability of that touchscreen. Shall we hop in the back seat? Here in the back seat of the Impreza, that's behind my own seating position, and it's really not too bad. But there's a bit of an issue because you do have that all-wheel drive system, so you've got that raised centerpiece in there, and that makes this middle position not so useful for adults. Kids probably be okay. But have you been forgotten in terms of amenities back here? Well, kind of, because you still get the nice soft materials in the doors for your elbows, but those cloth materials in the door trim, they've just suddenly gone missing back here, which is a bit of a shame. The seats are still pretty comfy though, but there is another area where you miss out, and that's the back of this console here. There's no vents, there's no USB ports or anything like that. You're just sort of left without anything. Only on the passenger side do you get a pocket to store things in. And there's also a drop-down armrest in here. Nice to have something to rest your elbow on if you've only got two people back here. And there are two shallow cup holders here. If I pop this bottle, well, it might fall out in the corners.
The boot is an interesting one because it's a lot smaller than I expected, measuring in at 291 litres with the second row up. It leaves limited space for luggage, but the reason for this is there's still a space saver spare under the floor. I was surprised to find I could still fit the full CarsGuide luggage set as long as I removed the luggage cover, although it didn't leave you with any visibility out of the rear window.
In all this time of engine technology between the two Imprezas, a lot has changed, but a lot has actually stayed the same. Under here, you've still got a 4-cylinder horizontally opposed boxer engine. See the power figures for the new version on your screen now. It's a lot more powerful and it's a lot more efficient than the older EJ engines which came before it.
That's all well and good, but what happens if we wind back the clock by 30 years? How does the first generation Impreza compare?
So by today's standards, the original first-gen Impreza is, well, let's be honest, it's terrifying to drive. But that's only because since then, we've had so many innovations when it comes to safety and handling, but there's still some great things about this car. The handling is actually still on point. The suspension, well, it's all rooted in this one, but on the whole, it's not that bad. And the power, well, there's much less power available, but this car is a lot lighter, so it still feels like it's got a bit of get up and go. There really is something refreshing about driving a car that doesn't have all of today's modern luxuries and amenities. You really are fully in control of everything that happens here. There's no auto emergency braking, there's no all-wheel drive even in this one, there's no traction control, there's no anti-lock brakes. You really just have to pay attention and concentrate on what you're doing. It's a reminder of how far cars have come since, and it's also a reminder of the commitment to safety in the new Impreza and how high it is compared to how standards used to be 30 years ago. In this car, for example, an airbag was optional, so was all-wheel drive, technologies which today we take for granted. But there are other things too. For example, visibility out of this car is excellent because you don't need all the high belt lines and the big chunky pillars that a modern car requires for all of its safety, so it's really easy to see out of. And despite the things that are missing, there are some core things in this car which make it quite livable.
Things like cruise control, the fact that the air conditioning was standard, and it's got a 4-speed automatic, which at the time, well, that was pretty good. And while the new car's got that massive 11.5-inch multimedia touchscreen, what was standard back in the day was a tape deck, something that's coming back into vogue now. Driving a Subaru in 2024 is a very uniform experience, and that's because pretty much all the cars in the brand's range run on the same SGP platform and they have the same driving traits. That goes all the way from Outback down to the 2024 Impreza, which we're in now. And those key traits, well, they're very good. This is a very sort of friendly, easygoing car to drive. You've got nicely weighted steering, you've got the confidence of that all-wheel drive system, and you've got a pretty compliant ride as well. The current FB20 engine does have a fair bit of get up and go from that 1500 RPM mark, so it does feel quite sprightly, particularly when you're just milling about town. But it does kind of wane off around that 3,500–4,000 RPM mark, so it can't really compete with things like turbocharged engines or engines of a bigger displacement or even hybrid systems. And that brings us to another key point about that signature Subaru drive experience. The Impreza has all of the good parts, but it also has all of the negatives. And that includes the engine sounding really thrashy up above that 3,000 RPM mark, and that's pretty much any time you need to heavily accelerate. You just get that dull boxer tone breaking into the cabin. It's not as quiet as a lot of its rivals. And that's partially because of how noisy the engine is, for one, but it's also because it's mated to a continuously variable automatic transmission, which, as you might know, has a bit of a sort of rubbery, thrashy feel. As well, a fair bit of tyre noise does start to enter the cabin above that 80km/h mark. That is a common trait amongst a lot of Japanese cars, but Subarus in particular. Now, one other significant letdown I found in my time with this car is the fuel consumption. Now, the official claim isn't spectacular. It's 7.5 litres to 100 kilometres, but in my time, and keep in mind this is mainly puttering around town, I'm seeing 11.1 litres to 100 kilometres on the dash, so that's not particularly good. In fact, it's one of the reasons why I think a lot of buyers are streaming to something like the Corolla hybrid, which is attracting quite a long waiting list. In fact, it's one of the big reasons why I think this car is going to continue to lose ground against many of its rivals. The thing is, there is no hybrid variant of the Impreza, just this 2-litre engine, and with performance like that around town, I can understand why a lot of buyers would move to something like a Corolla hybrid instead. But for all its negative traits, the Impreza is still such a lovely little car to drive, and that's mainly because of its really comfortable ride quality, as I said, nicely weighted steering, and also the confidence of that all-wheel drive. This is a car that's not easily shaken in the wet or on an unsealed surface, for example, and it's that kind of confidence that people have always liked the all-wheel drive system of Subarus for. So to sum it up really quickly, if you've liked Subarus now or basically ever, you'll like this one. Now, one of the things I really do like about the Subaru drive experience is the consistent safety suite. It's the same across all Subaru models, and you get some core things with this. You get systems that have your back, but they aren't annoying. Safety equipment which are often big letdowns and even distracting behind the wheel, like lane keep assist, driver attention alert, and traffic sign recognition, are really laid back in the Impreza. They just don't get in your face and interfere with what should be a smooth driving experience. And yet all those key items are there and they do work, so you have the confidence that the car's got your back if worse comes to worse.
There is also a very impressive array of 9 airbags alongside all the modern electronic aids, including things like torque vectoring, but the latest Impreza is yet to be rated by ANCAP.
Ownership is standardized across the Subaru range as well. That's 5 years of warranty with unlimited kilometers, with 12 months of roadside assist thrown in as well. You also get a 5-year cap price servicing program covering the first 75,000 kilometers of ownership. However, it's not as cheap as many of its rivals, so that's worth keeping in mind. The new Impreza delivers on all the key points which have made the nameplate so endearing for the last 30 years. But the issue is, I think buyer preferences have moved on. Hatchbacks now need to do more than ever to compete with small SUVs. And with today's fuel prices, it's preferable to have hybrid over all-wheel drive. And that's why I think despite this new car being a high-tech and tidy offering with an admirable commitment to safety, it will ultimately still fall in its market share. This Impreza then really is one for the fans.